Intentions and Mishaps by P.O. Dixon. Narrated by Pearl Hewitt. Part 1. Love looks not with the eyes, but with the mind, and therefore is winged Cupid, painted blind. William Shakespeare. February 1813. London, England, Darcy House. It is a truth universally acknowledged that even the best laid intentions, however noble, are seldom immune to the uncertainty of mishaps. Whatever the truth of such sentiments, Mrs. Elizabeth Darcy née Bennet would soon discover. Outside, the bustling streets of Mayfair that mid-February day seemed miles and miles away, while inside the Darcy townhouse, Elizabeth was all anticipation. Navigating the first months of marriage, and indeed her first London season, had been full of wonder and adventure. "What a whirlwind of excitement this has been, has it not, Mrs. Darcy?" said her lady's maid to her. Elizabeth watched Mrs. Grant's reflection in the mirror as the older woman carefully attended to her hair, resisting the urge to add her own touches here and there. "I could not agree more," was her reply. It remained a novelty, this extraordinary attention. After years of sharing a maid with 4 sisters at Longbourn, where patience and compromise had been a necessity, having someone solely devoted to her felt both strange and indulgent. Her manner of living, the unexpected luxuries, someone always at her beck and call, it was something she supposed she might grow used to. For now, it served as a constant reminder of how far she had come from the familiar chaos of Longbourn. And now, with the season well under way, the only thing that Elizabeth desired was to escape it all. The glittering balls, the theatre boxes where every glance led to hushed whispers, and the elegant dinners where conversations bore undertones of subtle rivalries. She had admired fine art at exclusive exhibitions and listened to stirring performances in grand drawing-rooms, always aware of society's sharp eyes, ever watchful and eager to scrutinize Pemberley's new mistress. The relentless demands of society life left her yearning for the comfort of simplicity. What she desired most now was an intimate celebration for 2, far from the clamour and spectacle, with her husband, Mr. Darcy. St. Valentine's Day is fast approaching, so what better time to reaffirm my commitment to my beloved Fitzwilliam? Hours later, Elizabeth shifted in her seat, listening to the soft crackle of the fire as February's chill settled outside. Her thoughts wandered far from town, back to another first, her first Christmas at Pemberley, along with many of her family. Elizabeth had been nervous at first, unsure of how Darcy would receive her family, as well as unsure of how her family's liveliness would meet with Pemberley's grandeur. Yet from the moment they arrived, he had ensured their comfort in ways that were both considerate and heartfelt. How far they had come since those early days. She could still recall the scornful look he had cast at the Netherfield ball, when her mother spoke so brazenly and recklessly. Lydia and Kitty had behaved so shamelessly, Mary had exhibited rather poorly on the pianoforte, and her own father had embarrassed her. Indeed, what a difference time had made. Darcy had once believed her relations to be her greatest flaw, yet he had not only come to accept them, but to embrace them with sincerity. She leaned back against the cushion, letting the thought settle over her. Yes, she had chosen well, and now it was in her power to show him just what he meant to her. St. Valentine's Day, a time celebrated by lovers with heartfelt tokens and whispered promises. At 21, this could be considered Elizabeth's first true St. Valentine's Day. It was certainly the only one that mattered. Never had she cause to think of that particular day as differing from any other winter's day, having never found herself in love at that time of year. She had escaped Cupid's arrow for so long, far too long were one to ask her mother, Mrs. Francine Bennet, a woman of mean understanding and uncertain temper, whose chief occupation in life was marrying off all her daughters. For all Elizabeth knew, her dear husband had never had cause to recognise the occasion before either, for she liked to think she was his first love, his only love, just as he surely was hers. Elizabeth had pored over countless volumes, seeking inspiration for a gesture both meaningful and romantic, determined to uncover the perfect expression of affection. She had even consulted her sister Jane, who had spent part of the season in London with her beloved husband, Charles Bingley. However, the Bingleys had since retreated to the comfort of their own home at Netherfield, eager for a respite from the constant presence of his pernicious sisters. Armed with the insights gained from her extensive reading and her conversation with Jane, Elizabeth had at last devised the perfect scheme. Everyone's first St. Valentine's Day with the one they love ought to be special, Elizabeth thought. She had circled the date in her heart ever since the idea first took root. She wanted Mr. Darcy's to be one he would never forget. Not that her scheme was without its risks of coming together smoothly, for it depended on any number of factors that were simply not in her control. Elizabeth dared not dwell on that, for it was not in her nature to do so. Her spirit invariably rose in the face of attempts to intimidate or unsettle her. It was that same indomitable spirit that she would rely upon now as she navigated the unpredictability of her plan. To heighten the anticipation, she had confided in no one who did not absolutely need to know what she was planning, save a trusted servant whose role was indispensable. An incident at Pemberley during Christmas crossed her busy mind, one having to do with her sister-in-law Georgiana, which, as fond as it was, only reinforced her resolve. As Elizabeth liked to think of the past only as its remembrance brought her pleasure, she did not dwell on what had unfolded at that moment. It was enough to consider that the fewer people who were privy to her intentions, the better were her chances of surprising her husband. Secluded in his study, a room of refined dignity, its bookcases lined with well-worn volumes and a finely crafted mahogany desk that had served generations of Darcy men, the faint scent of polished wood evidencing its meticulous upkeep, Mr. Darcy was equally resolved to surprise his wife with a grand gesture on the upcoming St. Valentine's Day. He knew enough about young ladies and how they were wont to expect such considerations, even without the frequent hints from his young sister Georgiana, who had been teeming with ideas of late, no doubt a consequence of her youthful heart and romantic view of life. Darcy silently considered how far she had come, what with her growing sisterly bond with his young bride. Were he to judge by his sister's enthusiasm and closeness to Elizabeth, no doubt his wife would be expecting something grand. Darcy opened the desk drawer and retrieved a slip of paper, a receipt from his jeweller. The thought of his wife's reaction when he presented her with the gift he had commissioned especially for the occasion brought a smile to his face. By now, Elizabeth was no stranger to fine jewellery. As Mrs. Darcy, she had received a multitude of elegant pieces. Diamond earrings his father had once gifted his mother, a delicate emerald bracelet worn by Darcy women for generations, a timeless string of pearls renowned for their rare perfection, and so much more. But this piece was different. It was not an heirloom steeped in tradition, but something new, designed by Darcy himself, made expressly for his wife. The requested engraving on its back came to Darcy's mind. Heartfelt, elegant, and purposeful, it read, "To my wife, Mrs. D, truly the love of my life." Darcy's eyes softened at the thought. The words were simple, yet they captured his most deeply held sentiments perfectly well. He had pondered over the phrasing for far longer than he cared to admit. Mrs. D. It was both formal and personal, a title that conveyed pride in the woman who bore his name, yet one that still felt intimate, as if whispered between just the two of them. And the ending, truly the love of my life, was a truth that still astonished him at times. To think he had once believed himself incapable of such vulnerability. Memories surfaced, unbidden. The moment Elizabeth had first refused him, shattering his pride, and leaving him to comprehend how inadequate were all his pretenses in pleasing such a woman. And then, months later, when she had said yes, an acceptance so full of sincerity and understanding, indeed everything a man violently in love could expect. The inscription was not just a declaration of love, it was a reminder of the path that had brought them here, through pride and prejudice, frailties and forgiveness, missteps and atonement. Darcy closed his hand, as though he could already feel the brooch resting in his palm. He wondered how Elizabeth would react. Would she smile with that mischievous spark in her eyes, teasing him for being sentimental? Or would she simply trace the words in silence, appreciating their meaning with no need for an explanation? This gesture was not about extravagance, it was about her, about them. Just as he placed the receipt back inside the desk drawer, his sister gleefully entered the room. Her gown, a pale blue muslin, swayed as she walked, its hem brushing against the plush carpet. "Georgiana," he said with that familiar loving look that he always bestowed upon her when she appeared unexpectedly. In truth, seeing her ought to have become a habit by now, for now she was living with Elizabeth and him at Pemberley. However, she had only recently joined them in town, having spent time with her cousin Miss Anne de Bourgh in Kent during the early part of the year, which must be his excuse. She hurried to where he sat and took a seat in the large leather chair in front of his desk. "Brother," she began, "I trust you have made all the requisite arrangements for the perfect romantic adventure with my sister Elizabeth." "Indeed? With you here to remind me on a daily basis, how dare I not?" "Wonderful." With less enthusiasm, she adjusted her position in her chair, leaning closer. Clasping her hands, she said, "However, I wish you would be more forthcoming with me. Why, you have not mentioned a single word of what you have planned. You know you have never faced such a daunting challenge as planning the perfect St. Valentine's Day for your wife, believing, as you always have, that it does not differ from any other winter's day." She was not wrong in saying that. What reason could he, a man of sense and education with considerable knowledge of the world, have to give consequence to that particular day? At 28, he was no stranger to the company of women. He had long understood the unspoken rules of flirtation and seduction, even if genuine intimacy of the heart had always eluded him. Yet when he told Elizabeth that he had never been so bewitched by any woman as he was by her, he meant it. That resounding truth had driven his steadfast decision to make her his wife. Once again he found himself recalling the moment she had accepted his hand, and the unguarded rush of emotion that followed. The sound of his young sister gently clearing her throat summoned his attention, her expression that of someone expecting an acknowledgement of her sentiments. Her brow arched. She released a sigh. Darcy said, "Yes, well, there is a good reason that I have yet to share my plans with you. You know I prefer to keep my own counsel, and what with your being more than a decade my junior—" Here she interrupted him. "How much longer are you going to use the excuse of the wide gap in our ages to justify your minimizing my concerns? It is not as though I am a child. I dare say I am one of your own wife's closest friends." "Indeed, which bolsters my stance rather than lessens it in such a case as this." "What is that supposed to mean?" "As close as the two of you are, how can I trust you would not tell Elizabeth of my plans?" "Why, I would never—" It was now Darcy's turn to arch his brow. Georgiana said. "Surely you are not holding it against me for spoiling what was meant to be a special surprise for Elizabeth at Christmas time? How was I supposed to know you did not intend for our entire party to accompany you?" The incident she was referring to was an open carriage ride through the snow-covered grounds of Pemberley Woods that Darcy had intended solely for two, himself and his wife. However, when the time came to embark on their wintry escape, every occupant of the house, save the servants, had donned their warmest attire and was waiting in front of the manor house for a merriment-filled outdoor adventure to begin. "Did we not have a wonderful time despite the misunderstanding?" Georgiana asked in her own defence. He had no desire to chance any such repetition, however fond the memories had become in hindsight. "Indeed we did, my dearest Elizabeth especially. But that does not excuse the fact that it was intended to be a secret. By the by, you never told me how you learned of it." "And I never shall," she said coyly, folding her hands together and resting them on her knees. "Not that it signifies," he said. "As regards my plans for my darling wife on St. Valentine's Day, I shall never tell either." The sound of the door opening drew their attention, and Elizabeth entered the room. Darcy rose at once, his countenance brightening. Elizabeth paused mid-step, a knowing smile on her lips as she took in the scene. "Brother," Georgiana began, her spirits rising to playfulness, "I do not recall you standing when I entered the room." Darcy's lips belied his true sentiments, but the rest of his expression remained perfectly unamused by his sister's observation. "Indeed," Elizabeth agreed, moving to take the seat beside Georgiana, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "Why is that?" Georgiana laughed, emboldened by Elizabeth's participation. "Yes, why is that?" she pressed. Darcy regarded them both with the air of a man who knew he was outmatched. "You are a pair of incorrigible young ladies," he said at last, which was sufficient encouragement for the two. The playful banter continued, with Darcy suffering their mischievous jests with dignified tolerance, far from how he might have endured such treatment during the early days of his acquaintance with Elizabeth. Elizabeth, for her part, could not help but recall Georgiana's earlier observations from the days when she first came to live with Darcy and her at Pemberley. The younger woman had marvelled at Elizabeth's ease in teasing Darcy so freely. A skill, Elizabeth had reminded her, was the unique privilege of a wife. Upon deciding it was time to bring their jovial taunts to an end, Darcy consulted his watch and stood. "I fear it is time we part if we are to prepare for dinner." Both ladies rose as well, Georgiana nodding in agreement. "I suppose we must," she said, her voice that of reluctant acceptance. They moved toward the door together, but when Georgiana stepped out into the hall, Darcy gently touched Elizabeth's arm, silently urging her to remain. He closed the door softly behind her and turned to face Elizabeth, his gaze steady and intent. He hesitated for a heartbeat, as if weighing his words, then said, "I have missed you terribly, my love." Elizabeth tilted her head, her eyes dancing with amusement. "We have only been apart for a few hours." The intensity in his dark eyes remained unwavering. "A lifetime, in my view," he replied, his voice echoing his longing. "I am wanting you most ardently." Elizabeth felt a mounting desire stir at his words, causing her pulse to race. For all her teasing, she could not help but be moved by the depth of his affection. Reaching up, she brushed a stray lock of hair from his forehead, her touch light yet lingering. "Oh, my poor darling," she murmured, "how can I make amends?" Darcy's answer came not in words, but in action. He drew her into his arms, his touch gentle yet firm, as if unwilling to let her go. pressing a trail of light, lingering kisses along the curve of her long, slender neck, he allowed himself a moment of unrestrained passion. Elizabeth closed her eyes, moaning ever so lightly as a frisson of pleasure swept over her. The scent of him, familiar and comforting, surrounded her, further enticing her. A gentle tapping at the door shattered their bliss, and they stepped apart hastily, Elizabeth smoothing her gown while Darcy exhaled in frustration. His jaw tightened for an instant before he schooled his features to mask his disappointed hopes. Opening the door, Darcy saw Georgiana standing there, her countenance a mix of curiosity and thinly concealed amusement. Barely holding back a smirk, her tone remained deliberately innocent. "I thought we were meant to be preparing for dinner." Darcy cast her a look of long, suffering patience, though he managed a hint of a smile. "We are," he replied, stepping aside to allow Elizabeth to precede him. As Elizabeth passed, her cheeks rather flushed, Georgiana's gaze lingered on her brother and sister-in-law, though she said nothing further. As they all dispersed to their respective chambers, Mr. Darcy, with every appearance of studied composure, reflected privately that the next occasion upon which he might enjoy his wife's company uninterrupted would require far more diligent contrivance. Part 2. There is nothing half so sweet in life as love's young dream. Thomas Moore. February 14th, 1813. That morning. With so many calls on Mrs. Darcy's time, with this being her first London season, the newlyweds found their days spent largely apart. Breakfasts together had become a rarity since their arrival in town, and this day was no exception. Was it any wonder they cherished their quiet moments alone at night? Heavy curtains in Elizabeth's sitting room had been drawn back to allow in what little natural light could be had from the February morning sky. The fire crackled, the light scent of lavender lingering in the air. Elizabeth sat near the window, her embroidery hoop in hand, though she had yet to make a single stitch. Her busy mind wandered, filling with anticipation for the day ahead. A light tap at the door drew her from her reverie. "Come in," she called out, setting the hoop aside. Georgiana entered the room, her steps light and purposeful, with a posy of winter flowers in her hands. "Good morning, Georgiana," Elizabeth said, greeting her with a smile. How she dearly loved her new sister, her angelic countenance and grace always reminding Elizabeth of her eldest sister Jane. Georgiana's pastel-coloured muslin gown with delicate embroidery at the cuffs and hem added an understated elegance, while the pale ribbons at her waist and in her hair completed the picture of youthful refinement. Georgiana returned the encouraging gesture and crossed the room, placing the flowers in a delicate vase on the table near Elizabeth's chair. "I hope I'm not intruding upon your tranquil solitude." "Not at all." Elizabeth gestured for her to sit. "What a lovely surprise! Thank you for the flowers. How brave they are to bloom in such chilly weather." Georgiana seated herself on the settee and smoothed her skirt. "They seem determined to flourish despite everything, a trait I greatly admire." Elizabeth chuckled. "A most fitting sentiment." There was a brief companionable silence as the two women sat together. Georgiana cleared her throat softly. "I wanted to let you know I will stay at Matlock House tonight. Aunt invited me, and I thought it might—" She paused, glancing at Elizabeth for reassurance. "It might give you and my brother a rare chance to be entirely on your own." Elizabeth raised an amused brow. "A thoughtful gesture indeed," she said. Georgiana blushed. "I only supposed— well, it seemed considerate in view of the occasion." Elizabeth reached for her teacup. It is a very kind conjecture." Noticing her lapse in etiquette, owing to her preoccupation no doubt, Elizabeth asked, "Would you care for some tea? I can call for a fresh pot if you would prefer it piping hot." Georgiana, ever gracious, shook her head. "No, thank you, Elizabeth. Please do not trouble yourself on my account. I am quite content." Elizabeth hesitated for a moment, then turned her attention back to her own cup. Georgiana leaned forward slightly, unable to fully suppress her curiosity. "I suppose you and my brother have something special planned?" Elizabeth's composed countenance never faltered as she cradled the delicate porcelain cup, the citrusy fragrance of the tea pleasing her senses. She took a slow sip before replying, "I suppose you will just have to wait and see." Georgiana sighed, both satisfied and frustrated by Elizabeth's deflection. It was clear she would learn no secrets, though Elizabeth's unspoken excitement was unmistakable. Accepting defeat, Georgiana redirected the conversation. "Lady Ellen has planned a small dinner party, something simple followed by music in the parlour. I'm looking forward to it, though I think my uncle will insist I play at least 3 pieces before he lets me rest. He does have a fondness for your playing." "Yes, though I suspect he enjoys showing off that his niece is more accomplished than any pianist in town." Georgiana's tone was resigned, but her expression betrayed her affection for her uncle, although I can never deny him whenever he asks me to exhibit. Elizabeth reached out and squeezed Georgiana's hand. "You have always been so kind-hearted. Your brother and I are both so fortunate to have you in our lives." Georgiana's cheeks flushed, but soon gave way to genuine joy. "And I am fortunate to have you as a sister," she replied. A comfortable silence settled between them once more until Georgiana rose and headed for the door. "I will leave you to your morning, though I am quite sure your afternoon and evening will be much more interesting." Elizabeth laughed. "We shall see." Georgiana gave a parting smile before closing the door gently behind her. The room fell still again. Elizabeth turned her eyes back to the window, her heart light with anticipation. Whatever the day holds, one thing is certain: it will be unforgettable. Mr. Darcy's day started on what could only be described as a very unenviable note. Indeed, the butler, Mr. Hargrove, a man with a dignified bearing and who had served the Darcys faithfully since his youth, first as a footman at Pemberley, had entered Darcy's study with a note atop a highly polished silver salver. Recognizing the missive's embossed emblem, he seized it directly, suspecting it was a final confirmation of the dinner plans he had made for Elizabeth and himself at the private establishment. He could not have been more mistaken. What he read surely caused his temper to rise, but there was nothing to be done, for the Prince Regent himself had secured the entire establishment for his own pleasure. Effectively, his desire superseded everyone else's. The prince's reputation preceded him, an appetite for amusement so insatiable that even the finest establishments were mere pawns in his lavish schemes. Darcy had once been content to observe such indulgences from a distance, but today he was caught in the wake of royal caprice. Of course, it would be the Prince Regent, Darcy reasoned with a mixture of resignation and irritation. The man who suffered so little regard for the pleasures of others in comparison with his own. What chance did a husband's ardent intentions stand in the face of such truths? While Darcy had wanted very much to treat his wife to a scrumptious feast at the establishment, there was nothing else to do with so little time but arrange for his own cook to prepare dinner at his home. With his butler standing there as if awaiting his master's instructions, Darcy apprised him of the last-minute change in plans and directed the butler to meet with his cook to prepare a worthy feast instead. Assured that between his butler and his cook they would know exactly what was to be done, Darcy turned his attention to what he considered a more pressing matter. Darcy paced the floor. Elizabeth's gift should have arrived by now. Not wanting to delegate the task of visiting the jeweller to learn the cause of the delay, he set off himself. Just as he was about to enter his carriage, he caught sight of his neighbour, Mrs. Angelina Davenport, a recent widow and a former close friend of his late mother, Lady Anne Darcy. He had known Mrs. Davenport nearly his entire life, and had greatly admired her late husband, Mr. John Davenport. Although pressed for time, it would have been too rude to ignore her as she hurried to greet him. Instead, Darcy proceeded directly to his neighbour. She greeted him in the usual way, but there was something decidedly different about her on that particular day. Darcy said, "Mrs. Davenport, you are looking very well today. I trust you are in good health?" "Yes, I am indeed, Mr. Darcy. I dare say I have not been in such good spirits in months. Not since I lost my dear husband, Mr. Davenport." She placed her gloved hand to her bosom. "Why, you will never believe what he did for me. I can scarcely believe it myself." "I trust you will not mind sharing all the specifics that led to such joy," Darcy said. The elegant woman said, "Words can hardly do my joy justice. I had much better show you instead." With that, she brushed aside the fur scarf she had donned over her coat, and placed her hand close to the exquisite brooch. It was all Darcy could do to maintain every appearance of composure. How such a delivery intended for one townhouse found its way to another is beyond comprehension. Yet Darcy knew that berating anyone for the error would not recover what had already slipped out of reach. Mrs. Davenport cried, "Is this not the loveliest, most wonderful gift a husband can bestow upon his wife? Oh, and the inscription on the back has the most touching words a man can cite, sentiments straight from his heart. The delivery boy from the jeweller brought it to the house this very morning. I can only suppose my late husband made all the arrangements before he fell ill and departed this earth. Shall I tell you what it says?" Before he could reply, Mrs. Davenport commenced her recitation. Darcy did not have to listen to a word she said, for they were imprinted in his heart. Still he listened, silently reciting the sentiment along with her. "To my wife, Mrs. D, truly the love of my life." Darcy knew he ought to say something, words to acknowledge her joy at receiving such a meaningful gift posthumously from her beloved husband, but he could not. How could he, when he realized the one-of-a-kind brooch he had designed and commissioned especially for his wife had been mistakenly delivered to his neighbour's residence? Making matters worse, there was nothing to be done about it, at least not at that time. Later he would take up the matter with the merchant, but as the mistake had not been Mrs. Davenport's making, he was powerless to rob her of her joy, effectively stripping her late husband of his borrowed feathers. It would not do. His heart clenched as he watched her fingers brush the delicate filigree. The brooch had been designed for Elizabeth's touch, not another's, and yet there it sat, gleaming against Mrs. Davenport's coat. Finding his voice, Darcy said, "What a thoughtful gift indeed, Mrs. Davenport. No doubt it must mean the world to you to be reminded of the eternal bond you share with the late Mr. Davenport, one that surely extends beyond the bounds of time." "Thank you so much for your kind words, Mr. Darcy. I always said you were a fine, upstanding gentleman and one who would make some fortunate young lady an excellent husband. By the by, how is your lovely wife? No doubt you have something incredibly special in mind for her today, for it is St. Valentine's Day." She chuckled in spite of herself. "Oh, I know this day can mean so little to so many, but you are not just anyone. Not that I have to remind you, knowing your character as well as I do. Mrs. Darcy is doing very well, he began. And as for this being St. Valentine's Day, yes, I am very aware. And my greatest wish is that what I have planned for my wife brings her as much joy as your late husband's gift has brought you. Moments later, the two parted, with Mrs. Davenport making her way to her carriage, and Darcy dismissing his driver entirely. There would have been no point in going to the jeweller as he had planned, not even to procure a different piece of jewellery for Elizabeth. It was too late to commission another, and he did not dare present his wife with another family heirloom on such an occasion as this. No, he would have to come up with another plan, and he would have to do so quickly. What am I to do? As Darcy stepped into his townhouse, the frustration clouding his expression faded. An idea, uncertain yet compelling, had taken shape. Without a second thought, he proceeded directly to his library, a renewed sense of purpose guiding his steps. He crossed paths with that of Mr. Winters, his valet of close to a decade, whose sharp, steady eyes and precisely groomed appearance mirrored his disciplined nature. Winters evidenced an air of professionalism, marked by loyalty forged over years of trust. Tall and lean, he moved with the composed dignity of a man well acquainted with his master's affairs. He had been entrusted with one of the most delicate tasks of the day. "Is everything going according to plan?" Darcy asked, his voice carefully measured but betraying a bit of unease. "Yes, sir," his valet replied with calm certainty. Darcy's brow softened, though his mind still raced. "The roses?" "Delivered as expected and arranged according to your instructions," the valet affirmed with a slight bow, his composure unwavering despite the peculiar nature of the task. "Good man." Darcy's hand briefly tapped the valet's shoulder, a rare gesture of appreciation that spoke volumes. He resumed his path toward the library, each step lighter than the last. Once alone, amidst the familiar sanctuary of his library, Darcy inhaled deeply, the scents of leather-bound books and polished wood calming him. As he exhaled, the weightiness of earlier setbacks eased slightly while he pondered his next move. This was not just about salvaging an itinerary. It was about creating something unforgettable for Elizabeth. The roses were but one piece of a much larger scheme, yet knowing that part had fallen into place was enough to spark a cautious hope within him that the evening might unfold as he wished. In another part of the townhouse, Elizabeth encountered her own setback. Not wanting to draw attention to her plans for her husband, she had made her way below stairs for a private discussion with the head footman, Mr. Thomas. A lanky man with a composed yet commanding presence, Mr. Thomas's stature alone made it necessary for the two to take a seat in the presently unoccupied butler's office. His grave expression gave Elizabeth pause. Surely something was amiss. "Pray all is well with the arrangements at the venue," Elizabeth said, doing her best to keep her voice calm. Mr. Thomas shook his head. "I am afraid there has been a problem with the decorations, Mrs. Darcy." "Problems?" Elizabeth's heart sank. "Please do not keep me in suspense." "Well, as you know, the usual florist was not able to fulfill the request on his own. After scouring the city for assistance, he managed to secure an alternative arrangement. But the carriage delivering the flowers overturned while headed to the venue." He hesitated before continuing. "I regret to inform you that the flowers were completely ruined. I examined them myself, and I could not in good conscience allow any of them to be used." Elizabeth's mind raced at the news, but she forced herself to take a deep breath. "That is most unfortunate," she said slowly, "but surely all is not lost." A reassuring smile crossed Mr. Thomas's face. "Indeed it is not. After consulting with the venue attendants, we arranged garlands of ivy and clusters of soft white heather. In addition, candles were placed inside glass lanterns throughout to add a warm, inviting glow." Elizabeth exhaled, grateful for his initiative. "It is simpler than what was intended, but it retains a sense of modest elegance." She nodded. "You have done well, Mr. Thomas. I could not have asked for better judgment on the matter." She gathered her composure, determined to let nothing spoil the day. "Pray you and I shall meet with no more misfortunes. I cannot say it enough how important this day is to me. Thank you for being such a dependable steward." Elizabeth turned to leave, but halting her steps, looked back at him. "That reminds me, all is well with the carriage you hired, I trust?" "It is indeed. The coachman will be ready at precisely the hour you requested, and it will be decorated exactly as you specified." "Thank you, Mr. Thomas." He bowed deeply and murmured politely, "Your servant, madam." Elizabeth's mind wandered to the romantic setup she had envisioned, something more intimate than any formal outing they had ever experienced. A secluded pavilion draped in soft fabrics that swayed ever so slightly, with the scent of roses lingering in the air. With so much else to consider, her disappointment over the absence of roses would surely abate. In lieu of one of her husbands, the hired carriage was meant to be a special treat. The private carriage for two would be outfitted with plush velvet cushions, soft wool blankets to ward off the chill, along with a basket, which included fresh pastries packed alongside mulled wine, its rich spices of cinnamon and clove promising a taste of warmth even in the cool evening air. She had instructed that the lamps within be lit dimly, creating a soft golden glow, a perfect haven for two lovers in love. Her mind drifted to the carriage ride itself. I can already picture it, the way his eyes will soften when he espies the thoughtful touches, the blankets I chose, rich with memories of past intimacies by the fire at Pemberley, the flickering glow of the lanterns casting golden light across our hands as Fitzwilliam takes mine in his own and raises it to his lips. Our own little world, she silently waxed poetic. No sooner had Elizabeth and Mr. Thomas parted, the footman heading off to oversee the preparation of a picnic basket for two, and Elizabeth making her way upstairs to her sitting room, than she encountered a servant carrying a silver salver with a folded missive resting atop it. The moment her eyes fell upon the elegant handwriting, her heart swelled with affection, for it was from her aunt, Mrs. Gardiner. She accepted the letter with a grateful nod and continued to her sitting room, settling into a chair near the window before unfolding the paper. My dear niece, I hope this missive finds you well and in the happiest spirits of this special day. I've always thought of you and Mr. Darcy as the very picture of devotion, and it warms my heart to think of you sharing your first Valentine's Day as husband and wife. Yet I must trouble you with an urgent matter. The Charity Hall is facing a pressing emergency, one I would ordinarily address myself, given its proximity in Cheapside. However, all 4 of my children have fallen ill, and though I trust it is nothing serious, I cannot leave them. Thus I find myself in the unenviable position of asking if you might see to this matter in my stead. I know you and Mr. Darcy must have wonderful plans for the day, and I regret any disruption this request may cause. However, I assure you it will not demand too much of your time. I leave it to your kind discretion, and wish you the most delightful of days. Yours very sincerely, M. Gardiner. She read the letter twice, torn between her obligations and the carefully laid plans she had made. Elizabeth reflected on the many faces she had seen at the Charity Hall. women and children who had little more than hope to sustain them. How could she turn away now, knowing her aunt trusted her to step in when it mattered most? Her aunt's request was entirely reasonable. It was simply unfortunate that it should come on that particular day. Yet she could not refuse her aunt, who had done so much for her over the years. Indeed, it was Mrs. Gardiner, along with her husband, whom both Darcy and Elizabeth often credited as being the means of uniting them by bringing Elizabeth to Derbyshire that past summer. Setting the letter aside, Elizabeth pressed her hands together. She had only hours to resolve the matter if her plans were to proceed. Time was slipping away. It was already later than she had anticipated. Every moment spent in contemplation was precious time wasted. If I allow for the best-case scenario, she considered, I shall resolve the matter most expeditiously and without disrupting my special plans with Fitzwilliam. Part 3. Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. William Shakespeare. Later that day. Looking up, Darcy was surprised to see his aunt, Lady Catherine de Bourgh, enter his study, especially since he had instructed his butler that he was not to be disturbed. Not that such a directive had ever succeeded in dissuading her ladyship from her purposes. After greeting her in the usual way and subsequently telling her as much, he asked, "How can I be of service to you, Lady Catherine?" She reared her regal head. "I beg your pardon, nephew? Is this how you welcome an esteemed member of your own family? Oh, I dare say I have never regarded you with such cool civility, as though your presence were no more than that of an indifferent acquaintance." She let out an unladylike snort. "Although I ought not to be surprised, given that you married so far beneath yourself as to be considered laughable," her ladyship uttered in disdain. "No doubt the shades of Pemberley were thoroughly polluted at Christmas when you were forced to endure the entire lot of your sordid new corrections." "Lady Catherine!" he exclaimed, in a tone signalling his displeasure and his lack of patience. With a haughty, bordering on indifferent air, she threw a quick glance about the room. "Where is she?" He narrowed his dark, brooding eyes. "If you were referring to my wife, surely you do not expect her to be hovering in the corners of the room." She struck the armrest of the chair with her palm. "Nephew, I did not travel all this way to endure your insolence." He breathed in deeply and released his breath just as quickly. "My wife is not here at the moment. She is away." Her ladyship scoffed. "If I know anything about her, it is that she is likely in Cheapside. From what I have discerned, she spends a prodigious amount of time in that God-forsaken part of town. Not that it comes as a surprise to me. Like to like, as I always say." Darcy stiffened, though he took care not to let his aunt notice. His wife had indeed hurried out of the house, leaving behind a note she had entrusted to a servant, no doubt owing to his insistence that he was not to be disturbed. The note cited her urgency, but gave no indication of when she was to return. But of course it was for a worthy cause. As much as she enjoyed her charitable endeavours, he often wondered why her generosity so frequently centred on Cheapside, in concert with her aunt, Mrs. Gardiner. Did he not also have an aunt, Lady Ellen, the Countess of Matlock, whose charitable endeavours Elizabeth surely considered just as worthy of her time? Could Lady Catherine's crude insinuations hold merit? "This is no time for such distractions," he considered. Still, how abominably Lady Catherine had treated Elizabeth could not help but intrude. He recalled her insufferable condescension upon first meeting Elizabeth at Rosings, the barely concealed disdain with which she had spoken of her family and connections. Then there was her presumptuous confrontation at Longbourn, demanding assurances that Elizabeth would refuse any proposal he might offer. Worst of all, her reply to the letter announcing their engagement still echoed in his mind. A tirade that dismissed Elizabeth as wholly unworthy of her nephew and insulted their union as a disgrace to the Darcy name. It was a litany of affronts so egregious that if not for Elizabeth's influence over him, he would not so willingly cast them aside. "I had hoped you had given up all your resentment toward Elizabeth. But if that is not the case, then you can rid yourself of the notion that we shall visit you in Kent at Easter." "That sounds very much like a threat." "Consider it a promise, your ladyship." "Why, I never—" Frustrated, Darcy asked, "Why are you here, Lady Catherine? For surely you did not travel all this way merely to deride my wife, and in so doing risk further alienating me?" "As a matter of fact, I have a rather generous purpose in being here, one that includes both you and your wife." "Pray do not keep me in suspense." "Again, nephew, I caution you to take heed in the uncivil manner of your discourse when speaking to me. I am not one to countenance impertinence from anyone, much less a nephew I have known and coddled since you were in your cradle." "If I am uncivil, it is certainly not without provocation. But, as I do not expect you to accept any measure of culpability, I kindly ask, what is the generous purpose of which you speak?" "That is much better. Without further delay, I am here to extend an invitation. I require your presence at the theatre this evening. My Anne was to attend with me, but alas, her health prevents her from travelling so far. Therefore, I ventured to town alone, confident you would take her place as you have done in the past." Indeed, Darcy had attended various soirees with Lady Catherine when she was in London, intent on playing the role of a dutiful nephew. What better way to partake in society without risk of being accosted by eager mammas in constant want of rich husbands for their single daughters? But surely his aunt knew the significance of that particular day. "This evening?" Darcy asked, though he already anticipated her answer. "Yes, this evening." Darcy fixed her with a look of astonishment. "Forgive me, Lady Catherine, but you cannot be serious." "I beg your pardon?" "It is St. Valentine's Day." Her ladyship's spine stiffened, as though the very mention of the day offended her. "And what has that to do with anything? Such frivolous occasions mean little to those of sense and substance. Frivolity suits those with nothing better to do, but not those of consequence." Darcy leaned forward, his tone measured. "Perhaps the day is of no importance to you, but surely you must understand it holds meaning for a man and his bride of just a few months." Lady Catherine waved her hand dismissively. "Nonsense! Your wife will be content with whatever trinket or gesture you bestow. What with her having been raised in her sphere, her expectations must be very low." Her words were piercing, cold, deliberate, and unyielding. No doubt they rattled him, a consequence of his ever-mounting frustration, combined with his guilt that all of his carefully arranged plans for the evening with his wife were falling apart. He might very well fail to meet even the lowest expectations his wife might suffer if he did not resume the task at hand where he had left off before his aunt's untimely interruption. He rose slowly, placing his hands on the desk to steady himself. "Lady Catherine, I must insist you leave my home at once." Her eyes widened. "You cannot be serious." "I could not be more serious. Not only have you interrupted me at a most inconvenient time, but you have insulted me and my wife in the most egregious manner, and under the pretence of extending an olive branch of some sort. And before you owe it to the frankness of your character, I ask you to spare me an extended diatribe, for I have heard some version of it all before." Lady Catherine rose with a dramatic flourish, adjusting her skirts with unmasked disgust. "Well, I for one know when my presence is not welcome. You surely do not have to tell me twice, for I shall take my leave of you post-haste." With that, the grand lady headed to the door. Her movements were deliberate as she walked away, leaving an air of affronted pride with every step. With her hand poised on the door-handle, she turned and looked back at her nephew. "I trust this unseemly bout of confusion on your part shall not prevent your coming to Kent, as expected." Darcy ran his fingers through his hair, struggling to maintain his composure. "Lady Catherine!" She was gone, directly. Darcy sank into his chair, rubbing his temple. But the respite was fleeting, for the door to his study burst open. His butler, Mr. Hargrove, usually the picture of decorum, was visibly distressed. "Mr. Darcy, sir!" the butler exclaimed. Darcy looked up, taken aback by Hargrove's uncharacteristic manner. "Yes?" He cleared his throat. "It is the kitchen, sir." Darcy blinked. "The kitchen?" "Yes, sir, Mr. Hargrove hesitated, glancing toward the door as though reluctant to utter the next words. "The cook fell ill this morning, quite suddenly. The remaining servants—" He paused again, his shoulders sagging. "They took it upon themselves to prepare the meal." Darcy shot to his feet. "They what?" Without waiting for further explanation, he strode past Mr. Hargrove and into the hallway. Hargrove hastened after him. "Sir, I assure you we are attempting to regain control." Darcy was already descending the stairs. "Regain control? I assume that means control was lost in the first place." The butler's face reddened. "I fear that is accurate, sir." The moment Darcy reached the lower hallway, he heard the disturbing sounds of clattering pots, raised voices, and general havoc. He hesitated only briefly, and then pushed open the kitchen door. Darcy's chest tightened at the sight of the unfolding chaos. Will nothing go as I have planned? Flour hung in the air, coating surfaces and servants alike. At the centre of the commotion stood a wiry woman with an air hinting at more nerve than experience. Nearby, a maid tugged at a hissing pot on the stove, while a footman swept at spilled flour, only spreading it further. A pan of overcooked pudding wobbled dangerously on the counter's edge. Mr. Hargrove looked both apologetic and aggrieved as Darcy surveyed the disaster before him. "Sir, I feel it necessary to explain." He wavered, his eyes darting to the woman, who now stood frozen under Darcy's stern scrutiny. "Go on," Darcy said calmly, though his patience was thin. The butler clasped his hands behind his back, a gesture as much of habit as an attempt to steady himself. "The young woman here, Miss Brown, sir, was brought down to London from Pemberley last year. She was something of an assistant cook in training back home, or so I'm told. While her duties here are of a more menial nature, she is the only one among the kitchen servants who had any semblance of experience with such matters." "I see. And I assume she was also the one who took charge, rallying the others into a battle they were ill-prepared to fight?" "I cannot speak to the particulars of her methods, sir." Nearby, a younger maid muttered, "She said she'd seen cook do it 100 times. "Quiet!" Miss Brown snapped, though her trembling hands betrayed her nerves. "Watch out!" someone cried, though it was unclear what disaster against which they were warning. Darcy's eyes swept over the room. A rolling pin lay perilously on the floor, and a chair sat overturned near the table. The smell of something sweet but burnt lingered ominously. Mr. Hargrove stepped forward, straightening his coat in a vain attempt to restore some semblance of dignity. "Sir, as I was saying—" Darcy raised a hand, silencing the older man. "Let me rightly understand," he began, his voice remarkably calm given the circumstances. My cook has fallen ill, my cook who has overseen this kitchen for decades, and the rest of you deemed it prudent to embark upon an expedition into culinary warfare? While his speech was met with contrition-filled faces and nods, no one uttered a word. Darcy raised an eyebrow, his eyes shifting from the butler to Miss Brown and back again. "So, we have an assistant cook, for lack of a more apt description, in training turned aspiring commander. I suppose I should be grateful she volunteered to preside over this campaign." One of the younger scullery maids gave a nervous giggle, but was quickly silenced by Mr. Hargrove's warning scowl. "We meant no harm, sir," the maid said, wringing her hands. "We only wanted to ensure the Valentine's Day meal would be perfect." Darcy exhaled slowly, pinching the bridge of his nose. Perfection is hardly achieved by setting the kitchen at war with itself. As if on cue, a stack of plates toppled from a shelf and shattered with a deafening crash. Everyone winced. Darcy took a deep breath. "Enough of this," he said. He turned to Miss Brown. "What is salvageable?" She swallowed hard. "The bread, sir. It hasn't burned yet." Darcy nearly scoffed. A glowing commendation. "Sir, might I suggest—" "No. Here is what I suggest, nay demand. Listen carefully," he began, his voice lowered but firm. The noise ebbed as the servants strained to hear their master. "You will do your utmost to rectify the situation." Miss Brown nodded. "Yes, sir. Of course, sir." Darcy turned his attention to Mr. Hargrove, who by now was standing at attention by the door. "Ensure that whatever can be saved is prepared without further mayhem." The butler gave a resolute nod. "Consider it done, sir." Satisfied he had said all that needed to be said, Darcy loosened his stance, endeavouring to restore every sense of civility. "Good." With that, he turned and quit the room without another word. Part 4. The greater the difficulty, the more glory in surmounting it. Epictetus. That evening, Elizabeth was finally heading back to Grosvenor Square in the private carriage she had hired for her romantic surprise that night. Mr. Thomas had seen to its delivery, along with the picnic basket prepared for her outing with Mr. Darcy. Fortunately, she had thought to write a note to her husband apologizing for her delay, with the assurance she would not be away for more than another hour or two, and sent it to him by way of Mr. Thomas. But that was many hours ago. Now she was not only terribly late, but the treacherous downpour guaranteed that all her meticulous plans for the evening might be in vain. Hoping for a better outcome, Elizabeth's busy mind entertained any number of ways to reverse the tide of misfortune. A slow carriage ride through the well-maintained streets of Mayfair, raindrops tapping softly against the window panes, wine, and a host of delectable treats. Then, if the rain ceased, perhaps a moonlit stroll. Elizabeth laughed a little in view of this romantic rendezvous she was envisioning for the two of them. If I am going to dream, I might as well dream spectacularly. As suddenly as that, her dream became a nightmare. A harrowing sound shattered the night as the carriage lurched violently, rain hammering against the windows. Thrown to one side, Elizabeth slid against the wall, clutching the picnic basket tightly. An ear-splitting crack shattered the air, followed by the frantic shouts of the driver. The vehicle came to a wrenching stop, and the silence that followed was as deafening as the chaos before it. Rattled but unharmed, she steadied herself, her breath catching in her throat. What have I done to deserve such misery? She had trusted Mr. Thomas to arrange the carriage, though, in a fleeting moment of irrationality. She almost suspected him of harbouring some secret dislike of her. But such an idea could not be entertained for long. It was hardly his fault that fate itself had seemingly conspired to thwart her plans. From the overturned florist's carriage to the crisis at the charity hall, from the sudden downpour to this final frightful accident, it was all too much. Elizabeth felt so alone, aside from the driver who had aided her from the carriage, escorted her to a well-lit place for her safety, and was now set to head back to the wreckage. Fortunately, she had kept hold of the basket, though she did not have an umbrella, nor did the driver. If not for the heavy hooded cloak she was wearing, she was sure she would be at risk of catching a frightful cold, if not worse, standing there in the chilly winter torrent. Her garment was already soaking wet. "Ma'am, I ought to be heading back. I can't leave the carriage unattended for so long. I'll need to summon help." "You cannot simply abandon me here in the dark of night and in the middle of nowhere. Do you know who I am?" Elizabeth cringed inside at this lapse into a version of none other than Lady Catherine de Bourgh herself. But desperate people did not always think wisely before they spoke. The driver shook his head. "No, ma'am, but I am sure you must know. I myself am new to London. I came to town hoping for a fresh start with my uncle. That isn't even my carriage, it belongs to him, but he's taken ill, and I promised to help. I was thinking how hard can it be? I reckoned it would be simple. It wasn't. Turns out it was really hard." Her drenched cloak pulled at her shoulders, and the rain's chill seeped through her dress, adding to her distress. "Sir, the two of us are standing here in the pouring rain. Please spare me the story of your life." The young man nodded. "Yes, ma'am." He shifted a little. "I just thought you might want to know. Where I come from, everybody knows everybody. I never ever met a stranger back home. London is quite different. It feels like everybody I meet is a stranger." "Yes, well, here is something that is the same no matter where you are from. You do not leave a lady stranded in the rain," she exclaimed. He nodded again. "Yes, ma'am." "That said, I insist you remain here until you manage to hail another carriage or hackney, so I might carry on my way safely." The biting rain continued its relentless descent, the wind tugging insistently at Elizabeth's soaked cloak. She stood as close to the dim glow of the street lamp as she could manage, but it offered no true shelter. Worse still, her gown had begun to cling heavily to her legs, weighed down by the rainwater that had soaked the fabric through. She shifted her stance, only to feel the unpleasant squashing of her half-boots, sinking further into the muck. Looking down, she saw that the hem of her gown was now inches deep in mud. Elizabeth exhaled sharply, half in frustration, half in disbelief at the absurdity of it all. "What a picture I must make," she muttered under her breath, glancing ruefully at the filthy state of her attire. The driver, too, had taken to stomping his feet to fend off the cold, though he avoided meeting her eyes, seemingly too embarrassed to offer any solace. Her hem tugging further into the mud, she could not help but shiver as she whispered to herself, "Please, let this end soon." The clock on the mantel chimed, its toll breaking the silence in the dimly lit room. Darcy's jaw tightened as another half-hour slipped by without word from Elizabeth. The note she had sent assured him she would return within hours. He turned to the window, his breath fogging the glass as he scanned the rain-swept street for the 100th time. "Where is my wife?" Mr. Darcy pushed away from the window, shrugging into his coat with a decisive motion. The mounting worry in his chest refused to be ignored. Idly waiting was no longer an option. Mr. Thomas appeared in the study's doorway, his unease mirroring Darcy's own. You sent for me, sir? Thomas asked, his tone cautious. Darcy waved him inside. Yes, Mrs. Darcy was with you earlier. I need every detail, every stop, every delay. Thomas cleared his throat. She visited the charity hall in Cheapside, sir, to oversee a crisis in her aunt's stead. She mentioned she would be returning directly home afterward, as per her note I delivered to you at her request. Darcy's frown deepened. And the weather? Was she aware of its pending turn? The other man, upon further contemplation, said, She did not want to abandon her work despite the worsening conditions. Darcy's brow furrowed. Is there anything else you can tell me? Perhaps something that seemed inconsequential at the time? No, sir. Mrs. Darcy only mentioned returning directly to Grosvenor Square, Thomas reiterated. There was no indication she intended to do otherwise. Darcy's heart sank as the pieces of the day's puzzle failed to align. Did she seem anxious or weary? Thomas considered the question for a second. Not weary, sir, but rather determined. But she was in fine spirits. Darcy nodded. Determination. That sounded like Elizabeth. It was just like her to press on in service of others, storm or no storm. But now her whereabouts were unaccounted for. The ache in his chest compounded. What if the storm's fury proved too much? What if she needs me and I am not there? I need you to accompany me in search of my wife. It was enough said. In mere moments they were inside Darcy's carriage, determined to find his wife, the primary destination being Elizabeth's last confirmed location. Through street after street, the carriage jolted over the cobblestones, pitching slightly as it neared Cheapside. Its wheels splashed through deep puddles lining the narrow road, slowing as the charity hall came into view. The carriage lurched to a halt, and Darcy disembarked before the driver could lower the step, his boots sinking into the sodden, rutted ground. The rain continued its relentless assault, drumming against the awning above the charity hall's entrance. Inside the hall was a flurry of activity, volunteers packing crates, folding linens and counting supplies. A matronly woman with an authoritative air was directing the effort. When she noticed Darcy's imposing figure, she approached with cautious curiosity. "Sir?" she asked, brushing a strand of grey hair from her forehead. Darcy wasted no time. "Mrs. Darcy was here earlier today, overseeing a matter of some urgency, I understand. Can you tell me anything? When she left, whether anything seemed amiss?" The woman's face softened. "Ah, Mrs. Darcy, a finer lady I've never met." She gestured toward a nearby table. "She was here until after dark, ensuring everything was resolved, working tirelessly even as the rain poured." After a brief pause, the woman added, "Mrs. Darcy seemed in good spirits when she left." Darcy's jaw tightened. "Did she mention her route home?" "She intended to take the carriage directly back to Mayfair, I believe." His mind raced. Elizabeth had left as planned, yet she had not arrived at Darcy House. Something had happened between here and home. A delay, an accident, or worse. "Thank you," he said, turning sharply and taking his leave. As the carriage trundled down the streets, Darcy leaned forwards, his fingers drumming on his knee. An idea suddenly crossed his mind, teaching him to hope. The Gardiners. Elizabeth's fondness for her aunt and uncle meant that she often took comfort in their company. If something unforeseen had occurred, perhaps she had sought refuge there. The carriage pulled up in front of the Gardiners' home on Gracechurch Street, and Darcy hastily alighted. He climbed the stairs and rapped sharply at the door, heedless of the rain dripping from his coat. The housekeeper opened the door, her eyes widening as she took in Darcy's dishevelled state. "Mr. Darcy, sir." "Is Mrs. Darcy here?" His voice was calm but edged with urgency. The older woman shook her head. "No, sir. Mrs. Darcy is not called today." His broad shoulders slumped. At that moment Mr. Gardiner appeared with alarming concern etched across his face. "Mr. Darcy, you look as though you have been through a battle. What is this about Lizzie?" Darcy's restraint faltered for a moment. "She has not returned home. She left the charity hall hours ago, and there has been no sign of her." Mr. Gardiner's brow furrowed in concern. "Surely there is a reasonable explanation." Darcy exhaled, his composure slowly unravelling. "I want to believe that, but something feels amiss." Mr. Gardiner placed a reassuring hand on Darcy's shoulder. "If she was caught in the storm, it is likely she sought shelter. My niece has always been very resilient. Have faith, Mr. Darcy." Darcy nodded, grateful for the steady wisdom of his wife's uncle. "Thank you," he said calmly. "I will continue the search. Shall I go with you? I assure you it is no trouble at all on my part. I will do anything to help." Darcy extended his gratitude to the older man, but declined his offer. There was no point in disturbing anyone else's tranquillity. It was enough that his own was in total disarray. Darcy climbed back into the carriage. The driver awaited further instruction, his hands steady on the reins despite the downpour. "To the next intersection along Mrs. Darcy's route," Darcy commanded. "She may have stopped or encountered difficulty." The carriage jerked forward, its wheels churning through the muddied streets. Darcy fixed his eyes on the road outside as his mind spun through grim possibilities of his wife's predicament. At every intersection he strained to see any sign of Elizabeth's carriage. At length, an explanation struck him with agonizing probability. He had missed her. Somehow, amid the chaos, they had crossed paths unseen by each other. Pray that is indeed the case, and my wife was waiting for me safe and sound in our home. Elizabeth tightened her cloak around her shoulders, though it offered little comfort against the relentless deluge. The biting cold seeped into her bones, and her gloves were so soaked that her fingers had gone numb. She glanced up the street, straining to see through the blanket of rain for any sign of help, but the road remained as empty and desolate as her hopes for the evening. Her mind churned with anxious reflections. Had her husband begun to worry? Would he send someone to search for her? Or had her note assured him that she was safe and merely delayed? A pang of regret tightened her chest. If only she had been more open about her plans. Now, standing there on the street with the rain soaking through her very core, she felt the consequence of every misstep. The clatter of the wrecked carriage and the earlier chaos echoed in her mind, compounding her unease. She bit her lip, willing herself to remain composed. But the tumult of her busy mind would not be repressed. Her ruminations returned to Darcy, his steadfast devotion and the tenderness of his embrace. If only she could see him again, to let his strength soothe away her nightmarish ordeal. Just as her resolve began to falter, a faint sound reached her ears, the unmistakable rumble of approaching wheels. She held her breath, her heart pounding with a mix of hope and caution. The blur of a carriage came into view, and for a moment she feared it might pass her by, yet she could not tear her eyes away. When it stopped and a familiar figure stepped out, Elizabeth's knees nearly buckled beneath her. The rain blurred her vision, but she recognized him instantly. Colonel Fitzwilliam. Relief surged through her at the sight of him, her emotions somewhere between laughter and tears. She moved toward the colonel, her steps unsteady in the mud. "Oh, thank heavens it is you, sir! You can have no idea how happy I am to see you," she said, her voice belying her earlier distress. "On the contrary," Colonel Fitzwilliam replied, extending an umbrella over her as he offered his arm. You are precisely as happy as I expected you to be, and twice as drenched." Elizabeth let out a soft laugh, shaking her head as he guided her toward the waiting carriage. "You might have spared me the reminder." "And deny myself the chance to feel heroic?" he asked, a playful glint in his eyes. Elizabeth's brow arched. "Is that what this is, sir? Heroics?" "Undoubtedly," he said with mock seriousness. "Rescuing a damsel in distress in the rain. It practically demands a medal." Elizabeth laughed again, her worries easing with each step. The Colonel chuckled as he helped her in, settling across from her as the door closed. Inside the carriage was comfortable, more importantly, dry. Soon enough, she began tugging at her gloves, then rubbing her freezing hands together before bringing them to her lips and blowing on them, hoping to hasten away the chill. Sitting opposite him, she could not help but reflect on how easily they fell into banter. Their camaraderie had always felt effortless, unburdened by formality or pretense. She thought of Kent, of days spent in Rosings Park with the Colonel, recounting stories of his military service. She had often marvelled at how differently he wore his authority compared to his cousin. Darcy could be imposing and solemn, while the Colonel's amiability made him seem more approachable, though no less formidable. Despite Colonel Fitzwilliam's humour, his unguarded remarks in Kent had once sown doubt in her mind. Yet in time, they had also granted her unexpected insight, glimpses of Darcy's exemplary character that she had been too blind to see before. She sometimes wondered whether the Colonel ever realized the impact of his words, how they had both hindered and aided her journey with his cousin. He had also played an essential role in smoothing her path with the rest of Darcy's noble family. She recalled their first meeting after her engagement to Darcy, a formal and nerve-wracking affair marked by scrutinizing gazes and courteous but probing smiles. Colonel Fitzwilliam's light-hearted demeanour and clear affection for her diffused the unease, making the gathering far less daunting. He deftly redirected prying questions with amusing anecdotes or steered conversations toward harmless topics, sparing Elizabeth any need for justification. His mere presence had transformed potential moments of discomfort into something bearable, even pleasant. It had never escaped her notice that he did this not out of obligation, but because he valued Darcy's happiness, and in doing so he had in his own way become a loyal friend to her as well. Though their bond would never hold the same depth as hers with Darcy, she cherished Colonel Fitzwilliam's place in her life, a steadfast bridge between the man she loved and the family into which she had married. "I was on my way back from a meeting with an old acquaintance when I passed a wrecked carriage just up the road. I thought it strange, but imagine my astonishment when I saw someone, a lady no less, standing on the street in these dreadful elements. And that lady turned out to be you," the Colonel exclaimed. "Surely you would not be out in this weather without cause. Were you in that carriage?" She nodded, her countenance calm, despite the circumstances. "I am quite all right, I assure you. I was the carriage's occupant, but I was fortunate to escape unscathed." "What a relief," the Colonel remarked, his attention shifting to the basket she now held tightly. "Thank you for your concern. It seems fate has made other plans for me tonight, though I confess I had not expected an evening in the rain, let alone one in the company of a rescuing colonel." He gave a playful bow from his seat. "I live to serve." Saying that, he reached for her basket and placed it next to him. "Sir, you are incorrigible." The Colonel leaned back, stretching out his long legs. "Incorrigible, perhaps, but undeniably useful in times of crisis," he said with a grin. Elizabeth nodded. "This was meant to be a special evening, a surprise for my husband, but fate had other plans." She glanced down at the basket beside him, the wicker damp but intact. At least something survived. The Colonel's eyes gleamed. A sign, perhaps, that all is not lost. Elizabeth nodded, willing herself to believe it. You may be correct. I can picture Darcy now. You know how he gets when he thinks something important has gone awry. Elizabeth laughed. Yes, I am well acquainted with that specific aspect of his character. The Colonel's grin widened. I recall Kent quite vividly. The scowl, the brooding silences, and I confess I may have contributed to that storm cloud by letting slip a few details. Elizabeth's polite facade momentarily crumbled, replaced by a brief recollection of the past. She thought of when Colonel Fitzwilliam had spoken so casually of Darcy's part in separating Jane and Mr. Bingley. The revelation had wedged a thorn of contempt in her heart, festering and poisoning her mind against Darcy, leading her to believe him to be the last man in the world she could ever be prevailed upon to marry. It had taken months for her to view that conversation from a different vantage point. Colonel Fitzwilliam's words had not only exposed Darcy's flaws, but had also laid bare the weight of responsibility Darcy bore, the burdens he shouldered in his determination to do what he believed was right. The selfless role he had undertaken in saving the Bennet family from disgrace in the wake of her youngest sister's scandalous affair with his worst enemy was proof enough of his goodness. She studied the Colonel, who was now recounting a humorous adventure with his cousin. Elizabeth adjusted her position in her seat, drawing her cloak tighter around her, fending off the lingering chill. You may tease him all you like, Colonel, she said, her tone engaging yet resolute, but I would not trade that brooding gentleman for all the charm in the world. The Colonel's laughter subsided, his expression turning thoughtful. Then he is a lucky man indeed. The rain outside softened into a gentle patter as the carriage rolled along the familiar streets. Colonel Fitzwilliam's easy conversation and cheerful presence had lightened the disappointment pressing on her heart. He spoke of inconsequential things, tales of mishaps at officers' dinners and the like, each one designed to make her forget her ordeal. As Elizabeth and Colonel Fitzwilliam approached Grosvenor Square, she could not help but feel a sense of relief wash over her. The accident that had shaken her earlier seemed to fade into the background as she imagined Darcy waiting for her. The Colonel gave her a knowing look as the carriage slowed. I dare say your husband has worn a hole in the carpets by now. Elizabeth chuckled. That does sound likely. As the carriage came to a stop, Colonel Fitzwilliam stood and reached for the door handle. Allow me to ensure you make a proper exit, fair lady. Before Elizabeth could respond, he stepped out of the carriage and turned back to extend his hand to her with a flourish that made her laugh once more. You truly delight in the theatrics, she said, grasping his hand as she stepped down onto the street. The gentleman tilted his head with mock earnestness. Only when it makes the lady smile. Ascending the steps to Darcy House, she imagined Darcy's increasing concern, his dark eyes scanning the clock. How long had he been pacing, waiting, fearing she had fallen prey to the storm's wrath? The thought quickened her steps. The imposing door loomed before her, its brass knocker glistening with rain. Her heart hammered as she imagined Darcy himself opening the door. Would he pull her into a warm embrace or greet her with gentle reproach, relief disguised by exasperation? I shall know soon enough, she considered. No doubt the answers await me on the other side of the door. Part 5. Absence sharpens love, presence strengthens it. Thomas Fuller. Later that evening. Darcy was standing at the window, having ceased his pacing long enough to take a deep breath and gather his thoughts. How fortunate that Georgiana was staying at their uncle's home that evening, or she would be right there beside him, just as worried about Elizabeth. At length, a very recognizable carriage stopped on the street in front of his townhouse. He breathed a deep sigh of relief as he watched his wife step down from the carriage, aided by his cousin. Yet no sooner had that relief settled within him than it was shadowed by an old familiar unease. The memory of how effortlessly Richard had charmed her during their time in Kent the previous spring, and the role his cousin had unwittingly played in the wake of his ill-fated proposal to Elizabeth. Though Darcy had long since forgiven Richard for that unintended transgression, he had never quite taught himself to forget. And yet how ironic that the man who had nearly undone his hopes had been the means of returning his heart's greatest treasure. He was sure he owed his cousin a debt of gratitude, having imagined every grim possibility in the hours she was away, from overturned carriages to malicious strangers in the storm. Overtaking the butler, Darcy met his wife and his cousin at the door. Pulling her into his arms, he said, "Elizabeth, my love, I have been worried sick about you. Thank heavens you have met with no harm." The strength of his embrace was enough to erase the disappointed hopes of the day. Elizabeth had not realized how desperately she had missed this, being wrapped in his loving arms, the outside world's troubles fading around her. "Elizabeth, you are soaked through. Come, let us see to you before you catch your death from a cold." "It is nothing, truly, aside from my dreadful appearance," Elizabeth said, her voice steady despite the damp locks clinging to her face. "I am neither chilled nor faint, and I refuse to let a mishap in the rain interfere with our evening. Let us not make more of it than it deserves." Attempting to pass by the couple, the Colonel chided, "You might thank me too, old fellow." Surrendering her husband's embrace, Elizabeth read the confusion in his eyes. "I do not know what I would have done had your cousin not happened along when he did." Darcy still had not moved enough for his cousin to enter the house. Instead, he placed his hand on the doorframe. "Indeed, I am indebted to you for your gallantry, cousin. What say you to our meeting tomorrow afternoon at White's, so you might acquaint me with all the details?" "Darcy!" the Colonel exclaimed with energy. "What on earth has got into you? The least you can do is invite me in for a proper drink." Darcy threw a quick glance at his wife before stepping outside, closing the door behind him to speak with the Colonel in private. Colonel Fitzwilliam folded one arm over the other and stood straight and tall. Knowing how loquacious his cousin was wont to be, Darcy spoke before the other man could fashion a protest. "You must know I appreciate your seeing my wife home safely, and I am sure there is a remarkable story to tell in explanation. But if it is all the same to you, I would prefer to hear the details from Elizabeth. It is late. I have been worried about her, having gone out in search of her earlier and met with no success, and she and I have spent no time with each other today. But surely you can spare a quarter hour or so until your reunion for the sake of propriety and civility." He was grateful truly, but every second of Richard's lingering presence chipped away at his tolerance. All he wanted was Elizabeth, uninterrupted. "Good God, man, do you not know what day this is?" The Colonel frowned. Scratching his temple, he said, "Monday?" Darcy closed his eyes and drew a deep breath. "It is St. Valentine's Day." "And?" the other man began, his brow arched. "Since when has that meant anything to—" He halted his speech, his eyes opened wide. He uttered, "Say no more. Tomorrow, then?" Darcy nodded. "Tomorrow," he said, and promptly turned on his heel, entered the house, and shut the door, leaving his cousin standing there. He saw Elizabeth handing her wet-hooded cloak to a servant. The sight of her loosening her bonnet and shaking her hair free was enough to send a tremor through his very being. Mr. Thomas appeared at once, his arms loaded with towels. Elizabeth accepted one gratefully, dabbing at her damp hair as Darcy's eye swept over her, his concern deepening. He had hardly enough time to cross the floor to where she stood and take her in his arms again before the sound of the door-knocker halted his steps, shattering the moment. He dared not vouch for his temper. Surely not him. Not now. Yet as he threw the door open, the sight of his cousin confirmed what he already suspected. "Richard," Darcy muttered, summoning his patience. Elizabeth's soft laughter behind him almost broke his resolve to get rid of his cousin. Almost. The colonel held up his hand. In it was the basket. Seeing this, Elizabeth rushed to the door. "In your eagerness to reunite with your dear husband, you left this behind," the colonel said, his charming countenance a mixture of smugness and playfulness. "Oh, thank you for returning it to me," she said, accepting it from the colonel. "Perhaps all is not as dire as it seems." Indeed, for the night was long, and she was no stranger to making the best of otherwise unfortunate situations. "Whatever does that mean?" the colonel asked. Darcy, not willing to concede another second of his time with Elizabeth, proceeded to shut the door. "Good evening, Richard." Now alone with her husband, her voice teasing, Elizabeth said, "You were very rude." "Pray forgive me, but you know how my cousin is. A minute more and he would have invited himself to dinner. Speaking of which, shall I call for our meal to be brought to the table while you see to changing out of your wet things?" He shrugged sheepishly. "Admittedly, the menu is not as grand as I had planned, but that is a story for another time. However, you must dine. I know it is late. You have had a long day, and I intend to listen to you recount every moment we were apart, especially the circumstances that led to my cousin bringing you home." Concluding his speech, he reached for the basket. Hesitating, Elizabeth said, "Indeed, it is late. Rather than rouse those in the kitchen, let us allow them to enjoy what remains of their evening. Meanwhile, you might wish to join me in my sitting room so that you and I can partake of the contents of this basket. It was meant to be a part of a surprise I had planned for the two of us. But it is not too late to salvage what we can of the evening. What say you?" Reaching for the basket once again, and this time with success, he said, "I say it is an arrangement that suits my purposes very well." Darcy reached for her hand. His voice low, edged with vulnerability he rarely let show, he said, "I thought I had lost you." She tilted her head up, brushing her lips across his cheek. "You will never lose me." Part 6. Come live with me and be my love, and we will all the pleasures prove. Christopher Marlowe. Later still. Darcy and Elizabeth entered the sitting room hand in hand. Darcy moved to stoke the fire, coaxing its embers to a steady blaze, while Elizabeth, now adorned in one of her husband's heavy robes, set the basket of delicacies on a table by the settee. Darcy joined her, his hand brushing hers as he reached for the basket. Together they unpacked its contents. Fresh bread, cheeses, tarts, and a small bottle of wine, each item a symbol of Elizabeth's caring. As they shared a silent glance, their unspoken thoughts of the trials of the day seemed to drift away. "You thought of everything," Darcy said, unwrapping the small loaf of bread. He broke it in two and handed her a piece. Elizabeth accepted it with a nod. "I had hoped to surprise you with a perfect evening." She laughed a little, though I dare say the storm had other plans. Darcy took a bite and leaned back slightly, savouring the delectable blend of flavours. There is something perfect about this, too. Just us, alone at last." She rested her head against his shoulder. "I suppose that is true." Her voice softened. "Do you recall our early days? How often we misunderstood one another? And yet here we are, sharing bread and wine, no misunderstandings between us." Darcy nodded. "I often reflect on that day at Pemberley, how you came back into my life, your mere presence quietly reigniting my hopes and dreams, filling me with thoughts of the possibility of a future with you." Elizabeth reached for the bottle of wine and poured both of them a small glass. "To weathering storms, in every sense of the word," she said, raising her glass. Darcy responded in kind, lifting his glass to hers with a light clink. "To you, Elizabeth." She leaned back and exhaled a contented sigh. "What a day this has been, has it not? The two of us, it seems, have been unknowingly labouring in vain towards similar purposes." Smiling, he could only agree. "Indeed, as much as I relish the idea of the two of us celebrating the night with a picnic at the venue you secured and a private carriage for two, your enduring such a dire mishap and being stranded in the rain pains me deeply. I should have been there for you." Elizabeth placed a hand on his cheek. "All is well that ends well, my love. Lest you forget my favourite philosophy to think only of the past as its remembrance brings me pleasure. Let us speak no more about today's mishaps." Darcy held his glass aloft. "To our first St. Valentine's Day as husband and wife." Elizabeth's face was overspread with joy as she raised her glass. "To many more to come." Darcy said, "I genuinely wanted to make this day special for you too, my love. Our first St. Valentine's Day as man and wife, a day that you would cherish and remember forever. Alas, fate successfully conspired against me at every turn. I am not completely empty-handed, however, for I wrote a poem for you." Her eyes brightened. "You wrote a poem? Especially for me? How wonderful! Pray let me see it. Or better still, where is it so that you might read it to me?" He coloured a little. "It is not exactly written on paper, fate being what it was," he said, recalling the mishap with his broken pen, which he had no time to mend. "Rather it is written, dare I say, etched, deep inside my heart. Shall I share it with you now? Or would you rather wait until I can commit it to paper?" "Fitzwilliam, my love, can there be but one answer?" "Indeed, my impatient one." Taking both her hands in his, Darcy began to speak the words he had committed to heart. "When a man makes a woman his wife, when she becomes the hope that wakes him, and the dream that lulls him to sleep, when any pain or discomfort she feels he would rather shoulder as if it were his own, when he would take upon himself every fault should the glow in her bewitching eyes threaten to dim, when he likens her warmth to the morning light, her brilliance to the stars at night, when her voice becomes his melody, her laughter his harmony, her liveliness, her wit and charm his rhapsody, and her presence the only solace he needs. When he finds he can share his life, his home, his world with no one else but her, when he meets the woman who makes him suffer all these things and more, a man's greatest desire is surely to make this woman his wife. You, my dearest, loveliest Elizabeth, are the very essence of all these sentiments. The best decision this man has ever made," he whispered, pausing and placing their joined hands over his heart, "was to make you my wife." As Darcy had recited the words from his heart, Elizabeth's gaze never wavered, She was silent, though her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. When she spoke, her voice was soft but steady. And the best decision this woman has ever made was to say yes. For a fleeting moment, the memory of Hunsford could not help but intrude. His first proposal so awkward, laced with pride, his disbelief when she had refused him. Yet that memory no longer brought pain. Instead, it served as a reminder of how far they had come. Her voice low, Elizabeth said, "Fitzwilliam, do you know why I said yes?" Darcy's brow furrowed, his eyes filled with curiosity. "Because you love me?" Elizabeth's expression softened. "True, but more than that. I said yes because you understood me even when I scarcely understood myself. You taught me how to trust, not only in you, but in us." Darcy's gaze softened and he lifted her hand to his lips. The fire crackled softly from across the room. This was indeed their private sanctuary, rendering them careless of everything outside the door. Sitting closely on the settee, Elizabeth nestled slightly into the crook of Darcy's arm, letting the familiar scent of him, a comforting blend of sandalwood and soap, wrap all around her. Turning to look up at him, she noticed how he seemed to study her face, as though committing every detail to memory, just as she had memorized his own 100 times before. His hand resting lightly on her back began tracing slow, idle circles, a gesture so natural and so tender, and filled with such affection that it made her heart flutter. "Elizabeth," he began, his voice just as tender, "these past months have been the happiest of my life. You have brought such joy and liveliness into my every moment." His dark brooding eyes unwavering, he continued, "I find myself longing for your presence whenever we are apart." Darcy brushed a light kiss on her lips. "Happy St. Valentine's Day, my love." Elizabeth spoke in kind. "Happy St. Valentine's Day." "Is it strange," he continued, "that I awaken every morning and am astonished that you are mine?" Her eyes brightened. "I dare say, my love, I find myself suffering a similar sentiment. It is, after all, quite remarkable that a certain proud gentleman turned out to be the love of my life." Elizabeth's words recalled to his mind the brooch he had commissioned for her. What was meant to be a cherished heirloom, now in the hands of another. No doubt it would have added the perfect touch to that moment. "Mrs. Darcy," he uttered. Her heart swelled at the mentioning of her favourite appellation for herself, just as it always did when it came from his lips. The sound of his voice, so rich and melodious, sent a shiver of desire through her. She tilted her head just so, inviting the warmness of his breath to caress her skin as he spoke on. "Truly, the love of my life." Without hesitation, she leaned in and brushed a kiss upon his lips, gentle and sweet, though lingering just long enough to leave them breathless. When she drew back, a glimmer of surprise shone on his face, as though proof that her love continued to astonish him. No other words needed to be spoken. The fire's glow cast a soft bloom of light around them as they sat, their foreheads touching, their hearts beating as one, and the promise of forever silently sealing the endless connection between them. Indeed, a love exceeding the boundaries of time itself. You've been listening to Intentions and Mishaps by P.O. Dixon, narrated by Pearl Hewitt.